Welcome to another edition of the MYB Cast, a podcast devoted to educating our followers to alternatives for self-care and wellness through the somatic world of the mind-body connection. Today, we're featuring another episode of our series, Portraits of the Pioneers. Portraits of the Pioneers is an in-depth look at those that have been actively involved in the exploration, the development, and the practice of somatic touch therapy. Hi, I'm Richard Mack, and I'm here with my co-host, Anna Marie Bowers, and today Anna Marie and I are honored and excited to have Jack Blackburn as our guest. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jack. We look forward to a
Thank
really
you.
exciting time with you. And maybe we'll get
I drink
started
to
if
that.
you could. All right. Let's start hearing a little bit about what got you into somatics in the first place, somatic touch. How you found yourself in that field.
Well, I found myself in the field of bodywork back in the early 1980s. And I was suggested to go into bodywork by the Vipassana teacher that I was working for. I was managing a Buddhist retreat center on San Juan Island, up in the San Juan group of islands. And he took me to Seattle, and he paid for my first Traeger session. So when I experienced that, that was with Glenn Crowell, I felt like, okay, he was suggesting very strongly that I become a body worker. The reason he said that, he said, you're a really good manager, you're really good with people, you're really good with your hands, but you're way up into your head, so you need to do something different. That was about meditation, right? So after the session with Gwen, I decided to take a training, which I did in Seattle. I was in her first training. This was 1980, end of 1984. And I liked what I was experiencing in those classes. And right after I completed the classes, at the end of 1985, I was able to get a job at Rosario Resort on Orcas Island, which is a tourist attraction for many, many people, especially in the Northwest. So, yeah, and that was before the state of Washington had certain rigid requirements. You had to take a test, and you had to demonstrate your abilities, but they didn't have other requirements. So I did those things. I took a piano player friend. I'm a musician. I took a friend of my friend as my demo model. I had worked on her a number of times. And so I passed, and I started a couple of months into 1985. And I thoroughly enjoyed working with people. And it was very much a steep learning curve in the beginning because uh, in Traeger, the whole idea is to create this movement in every part of the body for people so that they actually feel differently and much more aware of their body. And I worked on this one client, and she moved freer than anybody I had ever worked on that to that point. And then 2 hours later, I got a call at home from her, and she said, "I feel like I've been run over by a Mack truck." And I said, "Oh my God, what is going on?" And so I said, "Well, let's get together tomorrow at the resort and we'll figure this out." And that's what we did. And it turned out she was a very moving kind of person because her extrinsic muscles, the muscles that actually hold our body together on the outside, were very weak. That's why she felt like she'd been run over by a Mack truck, because she moved so freely. And then I learned, that was one of my first lessons in bodywork. I learned that people are different, and some people move very freely, but they don't. They are not in good shape in their body because those muscles are not doing the job. So anyway, I continued on and started also doing sessions in Seattle with people that I had worked, also in Victoria, Canada, with people that I had worked at the resort. And so my work and my experience grew quite a bit. And then I started flying to Seattle to work on people over the weekends. And that I joined a center of different people doing body work, and the person who won it, who ran the center, was a let's see, her background was really more in psychology, but she'd had a near-death experience. And uh, she was very, very interested in the body and what actually goes on in the body. So she was working with people, helping them with fears that they had and so on and so forth. And then all the rest of us were working in our various modalities. That worked out really, really well. And so that was a really big, wonderful change for me. The people that I had seen on the island became my clients, my first clients in Seattle. And then eventually I did move to Seattle because I decided I was going to go to graduate school. The one who ran the center had been to graduate school at uh, Seattle University, which is a Jesuit college in Seattle. I am not Catholic. I was never raised Catholic. But she said, with what you're doing, Jack, I think you should actually, because I told her I felt really badly that body workers were being trained to not use words at all when they work with clients. And I thought, this is not right. We all have the capacity to use words. And I understood where the restrictions were coming. They were coming from the psychological community. They said, you guys are not trained to use your words. And that's because they had gotten into trouble because they were touching bodies, and then psychologists were told they couldn't touch bodies anymore.
Yeah,
So
it was an interesting time that back then in the 80s with both fields, both the touch
yeah.
field and the psychological field. Exactly.
Well, yeah, and the first massage schools were teaching everything because it
Right.
was part of the New Age movement. It was, and there were, of course, massage parlors growing up all over the place too, which were doing something a little different than we were. That still exists in a lot of places, and so a lot of people are confused about bodywork, but that's a whole other subject.
Yeah. Were
Yeah.
you
Jack,
already interested in were you already how should I ask this question? Sorry. Did you feel like you were going towards massage and body work as a career path, or in your life you just
I
were
was experimenting at the time,
okay.
and but then I had, go ahead, Richard. You were going to say something.
the point that I was going to make is that so I've been working with you as a tutor and as a fellow board member in the foundation, and I've always referred to you in your approach towards looking at this type of body work, looking at body work as a very important modality in a place where people are not being touched, and touch is a very important aspect of the healing process. The other thing that you brought to my attention and you got me involved in is keeping soap notes, actually writing about what you're experiencing with your clients, feeling that this is really important. And quite frankly, it was that approach when we brought you onto the board of directors, that we changed our whole focus of the foundation to support people to write about what they were experiencing. So,
Mhm.
um, I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about why that was such an important approach for you, because you definitely laid the foundation. You've probably written more than just about anybody in this field. So, what brought you into writing?
Well, I had been writing my whole life when I wasn't playing music and doing other things. And but I also decided, well, my first actually paid client in on Orcas Island was an insurance client. She was covered by insurance. And so I actually, and she was somebody who could not move. She was on the floor on a mattress uh, because she was in such pain. And what happened was I looked into the whole insurance thing, and I realized I had to write a report for each session in order to get paid. And so I started doing that. I started learning the language a lot better, so I could be more specific. And she was my entree into a very different kind of Traeger work, which was putting somebody on their side. She could not lie on her back. She could not lie on her stomach. I had to do everything. I had to figure out, and I had taken a class with Betty Fuller introducing different positions that you could work on people. But not only had I uh, had to develop a new way of working based on her, and but I had to write up everything in order to get paid. So
Mhm.
that was the beginning of the writing as far as the body work was concerned. But then I realized that if I created soap notes from every session that I did, uh, that I could track for myself much more what was going on with the client. And in that sense, every time I had somebody with a special condition, um, what is it? Anyway, I started working on some people who were very, very disabled. And those soap notes, my notes from the sessions, and also I always got notes from the client. I also asked the client in the beginning and at the end of the session what was going on. That taught me. I was working. My first severe client was Parkinson's, and he was running a hardware store. He and his wife were running a hardware store on the island, and but he was losing the ability to do anything. And so I would go upstairs and I'd work on him upstairs, and he'd be moving much, much more freely in his body. And then at the end of the session, every session, I would have him walk for me. But what would happen is he would walk straight, and then in order to turn, he got confused. And uh, and then I realized that uh, there was something going on in the mind that I had to understand. I've worked on many Parkinson's people since then, but that what I realized was that the mind was competing, the thinking mind was competing with the body. Who wasn't feeling his body, and because he wasn't feeling, he wasn't sure about how to turn with his body. I'd go downstairs then into the hardware store and get paid by his wife. And then I'd hear this big crash because he had tried to do it on his own and he fell. And that was also part of the big learning lesson. So every kind of condition that I worked on, I developed a kind of an understanding of what was going on. So that's where the writing started. And but then I realized also that my colleagues were not writing, and so I started encouraging other body workers to write about their experience. And Richard, I want to say one thing about what you said about the body work world. To me, the bodywork world is the other form of treatment that is not yet recognized as full-blown treatment. And so everything I'm writing is actually to uplift us as a profession, which is in part difficult because the massage parlors still exist. And the massage schools, so many of the massage schools are just dumbed down ways of making money where they really don't learn that much. So, but for me, touch is like it's one of the most significant things that can happen for a person when it's informed touch, when the client is really aware of what's going on when they're being touched. So, yeah,
So it would be safe to say that you are probably one of the pioneers of moving the body workers from spa environment to clinical approach, where you're actually doing this work for a specific purpose, not for
yeah,
somebody to come in and give me a rub and, make me, take some of the knots out of me. So you have
yeah,
a specific way that you're approaching into that. And maybe just talk a little bit more about that and how
yeah.
became your focus. And was that through, the work with Milton and the Traeger organization that steered you in that?
No.
Okay, go
So
for
I'm
it.
going to give you a little background that I don't think you know, Richard.
Well, this is for the world. You're talking to the world here, Jack. So,
When I was on Orcas Island, I was very involved in community affairs. I ran a treatment camp called Indralaya, which is a theosophical camp. I actually ran that camp. And they started teaching doctors and nurses to do something called therapeutic touch. And I learned the therapeutic touch along with the doctors and nurses. And I was also in a group on the island. We did therapeutic touch on severe patients on the island. This is way before bodywork. But we were working on them weekly. All of them lived long lives, which is amazing because they were all not supposed to live long lives, including my wife, who had chronic myelogenous leukemia. The
mhm,
doctor on the island became a friend of mine, and we redid the emergency medical team on the island because the people that were doing emergency medical runs were not well trained. They didn't know much about the body or anything. So he asked me to revamp that. So I did that. I also was managing the medical center on the island, and I was doing blood draws because I could do blood draws better than all the nurses. Uh, And I was also helping that medical center deal with what was going on the mainland because the 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 U.S. government was changing how people were paid. So I had to help orchestrate a way that we were already doing so that we weren't suffering from that experience. So I was already doing treatment work way before I got involved in Traeger. I had then trained in orthobionomy with Arthur Lincoln Pauls. I met him personally and went to his classes, and he worked on me before I ever. So this was when I came into Traeger, I had already the mentality was treatment,
mhm.
not just feel good, but treatment. And so I just wanted to say that because that's partly been one of the reasons I'm so strongly motivated towards not just treatment work, but uplifting the bodywork world so that it actually is a full profession. So it's really seen by the other professions. Wow, you guys are able to do stuff with the clients that we're not able to do at all. So there you go. Hopefully that's helpful.
Oh, and you've always championed that cause. And the other thing that I relate to you very strongly is towards your approach in the present moment, the now. And I know we're going to talk later on in our third element about what your new book is, which is all about that. But
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit more about, or talk to us a little bit more about this whole approach that you have, the approach of being completely present in the present moment and having the client be present in what is happening, because the healing is really happening in the client, and they need to feel what's going on in order for them to accept the changes that you're introducing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have a friend. He's still a really good friend, who was a client of mine, and named Steve. And so he would see me once a week. He was running a big center where all these not-for-profits were operating. And so he was managing this big center. So he had a lot of stuff to deal with. And but he also set up his phone system so it was very hard to get a hold of him. Well, the same thing pertained to his body. Every time he came to see me, he would complain about something that was going on in his body, and I realized that every time I got to that part that was going on, he would check out. He'd be gone.
Mm.
So I talked to him about it. I said, Steve, we're going to change the way we do this now. What we're going to do is we're going to interact with one another, and especially when we get to the place where you have your discomfort, I'm going to have you tell me what you're feeling as I'm working on you. And in the beginning, he was a kind of failure at that, and then we worked it out and worked it out, and he became really interested because something was really changing for him. And I realized at that point that when the client is directly involved in what we're doing, when the client is not just giving feedback, but when the client is touching my hands when I'm touching them, that's one of the ways of being directly involved. That's something that Milton Traeger didn't, that was not something that occurred to him. But the client was equally active in the session. And especially when they had pain. A pain is a very, very interesting signal. And I will tell you more about presence right now. Pain only occurs in the present moment. It doesn't matter if we've had an injury and we've been recovering from the injury for some time, and we're complaining because we always have pain related to that injury. The pain signal itself is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned, and I'm sure Anna Marie knows about this too, what I learned is when the client came into right where they were feeling the pain, everything changed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's not that their pain went away, it's that their relationship with the pain changed totally because it was no longer they weren't suffering, and they weren't the association we have with pain is that pain comes because we're guilty of something. We learn that as children because, especially in certain parts of the United States, children are slapped and doing all kinds of things, punished for being bad. So, so we have association with guilt and pain, and I realized that for a long time. That's why people who are psychologically uh, having difficulty because of something that happened to them when they were young or whatever, that I needed to actually help them change their relationship with pain. So it's not associated with guilt at all. But the signal of pain is only now. It's never in the past, even though that's what our mind wants to do with it. So that's a long answer to your short question, Richard, but I think it's apropos.
Very apropos, Jack. And the idea is in the presence. And that's really where I
Yeah,
was going with the question, is being in the presence. And
yeah.
the idea that we talk about being in that state of connection with the client, and in the Traeger community they refer to as hookup, but it's that
Mhm.
state of mind where the practitioner and the client subconsciously are connected, and they're able to move past just the physical plane of what's being done on that table.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say it's not always conscious with the client, but they learn to be conscious. The sharing of presence is also something very unique in terms of any kind of caregiving. Doctors used to touch bodies. They were taught palpation skills. They would do home visits. They would take a black bag with various tools and a little bit of medication, and they would see people in their homes. So the relationship with the doctor was much more of a personal thing. And that's totally changed in medicine. Although I have doctor friends that don't work that way, because they know that presence is a very, very important part of their work with the client. So I call it being to being. We're called human beings, but the word being means something beyond just the body. It's something that maybe includes the soul or whatever. The consciousness of the client is the being. So even as I'm talking to the two of you, the three of us are meeting being to being.
Mhm. Mhm.
We're tracking one another, and that's basically what presence is. Presence is to kind of open that channel of communicating so that we're communicating now as best we can. I'll say one more thing about it. In terms of that that being to being connection, it's also our consciousness is of our consciousness can be in presence, but most of the time it's in the thinking mind, and the thinking mind is rarely present. That was one of the things that Milton Traeger was quite aware of when he was working with clients, that the client escapes into what they want to do tomorrow, what they did yesterday, what their ambition is, and what their failures are. That's the thinking mind. It's called the ego, and that's our trap. Um, in my introduction to my book, which I'm skipping ahead, but I'm not skipping very far, Richard. I said we are repeating the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel was something where human beings tried to reach all the way up to heaven because they wanted to be like God. And because all of a sudden they all spoke different languages. So they couldn't do it as a project, and it failed. And there's very famous paintings of the Tower of Babel coming from that. Well, we're still doing that. We're still with our egos. We're trying to run the world. We're trying to run every form of life. We're trying to run one another. That's what's going on. So presence is the antidote to the ego. I don't know. Hopefully that makes some sense.
That's a great tagline. Presence is the antidote to the ego. That's a great,
Yeah,
great tagline.
yeah. Because when we come into presence, everything changes. Everything changes.
That is
Presence,
so true. So true.
Yeah,
presence is the portal.
yeah,
Presence is the portal in which we connect on the
right.
things that we do. And
When we connect,
when we
Yes.
because a
connect,
lot of times we don't connect.
Yeah, you can be
Anyway,
present in the same room with someone and not be present.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, and animals live in presence.
Yes.
They don't have egos. If they live with a human being, sometimes, like a dog will try to uh, act like the human. So the human is God, right? Cats know that humans are not God. And Richard, you know that from your own experience.
yep, I do know that. I do know
So somatics is basically underlying somatics. When first read Thomas Haddow, I realized he's onto something totally different. And what he was doing was saying that a person's first person awareness is the most important part of working with that person. And that means that they're speaking from themselves, from what they're actually experiencing right now. And so somatics is really based on first-person awareness of the client. Even if they're not speaking, as long as they're feeling in their body when you're working with them, they are somatically alert. And many people who are talking about somatics now don't even understand what it really is. It's a buzzword now, but it depends on the first person awareness right now of the person that's receiving psychology or whatever they're receiving from that uh, practitioner. So.
Great. Well, Jack, this is a good place to take a pause, and I'm going to suggest that we come into the second episode of your interview and we pick it up with presencing and how you've worked with presencing with your clients, your tutorials. You've worked with me as a tutor for many years. Want to hear more of that. So I'm going to invite our audience to join us for the next episode. Until then, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.